Hello internet, welcome to the channel. My name's Frankie and in today's video we are building something very special, and that is the last habitat in our Halloween mini zoo, Phantom Creek. We are building for the ever adorable Fennec Fox, and this is potentially the cutest animal that we're going to have in the zoo because it's just outstandingly cute. There is no denying it. These things are just adorable. We are also going to be putting some finishing touches on the zoo to make sure that it's complete and ready for our tour, which will hopefully come out on Halloween Day. That's the 31st of October, so this coming Thursday. Hopefully we can have it ready for then. Yeah, we're just going to do a basic build for their habitat to begin with. What we're using is the gabion barrier. It's kind of like a bunch of rocks poured into a steel mesh. It's a really nice, hardy, quite affordable way of making a barrier. And the reason I'm doing this is because the last habitat we built for the Eurasian lynx was our first purpose-built habitat in the zoo. Meaning, if you've watched any of the videos before this, you will know that this zoo is primarily based on an abandoned village that has been converted into a mini zoo. And the Eurasian lynx was the first ever habitat that was built specifically for an animal. And this Fennec Fox habitat is going to be the second habitat that was built for a specific animal as well, because most of the other ones were converting people's gardens and stuff into habitats, whereas this is where the zookeepers and owners have got to a point where they're actually wanting to expand, so they are building for animals specifically. And this time we're building for the adorable Fennec Fox, and I wanted something that was a little rustic, so we've gone for that rocky kind of look, but also something that is going to be not so transparent, because these foxes are a little bit skittish. They don't really like being seen by the public too much. They're quite shy, so we're going to put some one-way glass windows at the front as well, just to help with the privacy. In terms of the layout for the interior of this habitat, I had an idea in mind at the very beginning to make a kind of cave area at the back where they can rest. That would be their hard shelter, made entirely of rocks that are appropriate for the biome that they need. And then we're going to use as much plant life as we can, which isn't going to be too much because these guys kind of live in deserts. But it is a lot more than I was expecting. We get to around 35% on the foliage coverage meter, whatever you want to call that, which is really impressive because I didn't think we'd get anywhere near that. So we're able to have quite a few trees and bushes and stuff and make it seem like a living environment, which is what we always want to try and do when building our habitats. Even though I did build a cave, they also like to sleep in burrows, so I thought I'd pop one of those in there as well, just to make sure that they have the full range of enrichment and trying to mimic their natural lives as much as possible. As per usual, we are spacing out all of our enrichment items as much as we can to ensure that our animals are going to be using as much of their habitat as possible, encouraging them to explore all different areas of the habitat. Now, some of you eagle-eyed viewers may have noticed that we were going to be adding the Fennec Fox from, I believe, episode 2 in this series, because the first shop that I built, I put a little Fennec Fox statue kind of poking out from the door. So if you did notice and you'd been expecting this video this whole time, then very well done to you. I'm pretty impressed that people would have noticed that. In terms of the front of this habitat, we are doing the usual things that we do on all of our habitats in the zoo, and that is to place a custom sign along with the education board, a few donation bins, and of course some actual bins for rubbish to be thrown into. We're also going to place a couple benches because there's a lovely little area for them to sit and look through these windows. It works quite nicely. I did consider popping down the Fennec Fox statue from the Africa pack, and the reason for that is because there are no illustrative signs like we've been using normally. Unfortunately, there is no flat image of the Fennec Fox except for a stone tablet, which is not what I'm after. I'm really after the illustrative signs that we've had before, so unfortunately this is the one sign that we don't have a picture of the animal on, but you know, it's not the end of the world, we can get past that. The lighting of the zoo has been a very important aspect throughout the entire build. We're making sure that we've always got some candles and stuff on the wall to make sure the perimeter of each habitat is lit up, and we also want some lights from within. This time I didn't go too heavy with lights inside, just a few pumpkins on top of the cave, but right at the back of the cave we've also got some of the glow-in-the-dark spooky eyes, which I think is very atmospheric and pretty cool. Haven't used them yet, so it's just a cheesy little thing to go in there as well. Then after that, I'm going to place a huge, like, ginormous mushroom right out the front, and we're going to start to do the finishing touches to the rest of the zoo, and we are starting with placing the rest of the pumpkins. There are certain patches in the zoo that aren't lit by candles or pumpkins, areas that haven't got a light source already. So what we're going to do is we're going to take those massive mushrooms and we're going to place those along the path, just to make sure that if you're walking through this zoo at night, there aren't any areas that are a bit too dark and therefore a bit hard for traversing. It would be a bit strange and you feel a bit uneasy walking down a really dark path. So we want to make sure that everywhere has a little bit of light at the minimum. And whilst we are placing these lights and such, I'm going to let you watch those, and I'm going to ask, if you're not already, please consider subscribing to the channel. My videos will appear in your subscription feed for free, and I will feel like I have more friends, which is always a good thing, because, you know, who doesn't like more friends? Yeah, okay, we're going to go back to the build and continue fleshing out this zoo and making sure that it's nice and well-rounded, ready for our tour later this week. As this is a franchise mode zoo, there are certain aspects that we need to keep in mind, and that is how our guests feel. That is a primary focus for me with this zoo, and one thing that I've kind of neglected is the education. We have built a couple shops and stuff throughout the entire build of this park to make sure that that is covered, to make sure that they've got adequate drink and food and toilets throughout the zoo, but education has been neglected. So for the first time, I'm going to be planning a tour. I've not done this before, but it's actually kind of simple. All you need to do is place the tour stops at each enclosure that you want our visitors to visit, and then you can assign the order that they will be travelled and make sure they're accessible. And from there, it kind of handles itself. If you've got an educator, they will wait at the first stop, and then when a tour group arrives, they'll walk them around the zoo. And it's quite nice to watch, actually. We're also going to put some animal talks in place. We're not going to put loads, we're going to put some in front of the wombat, the Eurasian lynx, the caiman, and I believe the pygmy hippo, because I think those are probably going to be the most popular animals, and therefore having animal talks there will be kind of beneficial. We're also going to place something that I don't often like using, and that is the educational speakers. I think they're kind of ugly, and because of that, I'm going to sink them into the ground and just hide them as much as I possibly can, whilst making sure that their range, their diameter, you can adjust this at the top of the tab when you're placing them. I'm going to make sure that that is kind of near the maximum, to the point where it will cover as many people as possible, meaning that it covers a large area so that a lot of people can receive the educational content, whilst not being too confusing by crossing over with an animal that isn't actually being spoken about. You need to be really careful when you're placing your education items that you don't place things too far away from the habitat that you are specifically referencing, otherwise the guests do just get confused, because they're fairly simple people, so you need to make sure you're doing everything exactly right for them. And with these additions to our education rating does go up to almost 5 stars, which is amazing. I did consider placing some of the conservation boards around the zoo as well, but they just don't fit. They do not work aesthetically anywhere in this zoo, because they're so sleek and modern looking. They do not fit this rustic vibe that we've gone for, and it just doesn't look right. So we're not going to bother with those. Another thing that we need to deal with before we get onto a bit of a time lapse so you can sit back and enjoy is the entrance. Now, I'm not making anything overly elaborate. We're not going for a big fancy entrance, because this is just meant to be an old village that has been left to nature and then kind of recaptured in the purposes of rehabilitating some animals for release. And to that end, we are going to have a fairly creepy entrance. It's going to be some really rough looking plant life, like lots of brambles and some dry grass and whatnot, dead trees. We're going to make sure that the entrance to the zoo is a little bit unnerving. Not big, not elaborate like I said, it's just a small area right at the beginning of the zoo that's going to have the twilight twisted tree, the really bare looking, quite skeletal tree. I haven't used it yet in this zoo, and I think we kind of need to. So what better place to use it than in the entrance? And then we're also going to create a sign for the zoo just to give it a name, and we're going to keep it really simple. Again, we are going to use the Twilight Blueprint sign. It's just such a good layout. We're going to get rid of the pinata animals, going to get rid of those. I call them pinatas because they're paper mache and it's basically the same thing. We're also going to remove the white painted wood, and then we're just going to write the name of our zoo, Phantom Creek, using some of the letters on the front of the wood. It does need a bit of adjusting because I do write it a bit squonk to begin with, so we need to move them over a little bit. Once we are happy with the layout of the letters, we are going to place a couple pumpkins at the bottom just to further push that kind of theme that we've been building throughout the entire zoo, this creepy theme. And then with that, we're probably done and can move on to starting to add a bunch of plants to the rest of the zoo. But one more thing that I forgot about just before we move on to the plant life is adding a few effects. I really wanted to create an atmosphere with the zoo, so across all of the water sources we're going to use some mist effects, and then wherever there's quite a thick coverage of trees, we're going to use the falling leaves as well. It's going to really create an atmosphere, and I think it will look so cool when it's a low light. I think at night time it's going to look really, really good, especially with the mist effects over the graveyard. That is going to look super duper creepy. So this is just a bit of a finishing touch to really bring this whole place to life and really cement that creepy feel that we've been kind of leaning towards throughout the entire build of this zoo. Now to add the most important finishing touch of this zoo, and that is to blend it into its surroundings. And to do that, we are making sure that the edges and all of the in-between areas have an ample coverage of plant life. And we need to make sure that this plant life is kind of consistent. So throughout the zoo build, we have been using plants from the temperate and taiga biomes within North America and Europe. We are then going to create ourselves a little template which is mainly made up of bracken and brambles, and we're going to copy and paste those all over the place, creating the foundation for a forest at the edge of this zoo that we can then expand outwards and just make it look as if though this zoo has been built in the middle of a forest. That's exactly what I want it to look like, and I think it does work pretty well. And a key way of making sure that this looks kind of natural is don't just use one type of tree. Make sure that you are using plenty of different trees from within this biome and continent, because that is how forests grow naturally in the wild. Anyway, you're going to have plenty of diversity, so you want to make sure that you are replicating that in your own builds, and that is how we're going to get a nice convincing looking forest at the edge of our zoo. Now this is quite a lengthy part of the build, so I'm going to stop talking for a bit and let you just enjoy the time lapse, and we'll have Floki's fact of the day and stuff, and then we'll be back later for some cinematic shots of the Fennec Foxes enjoying their brand new habitat.
Sizowaka,